The harsh, jarring sound of my porcelain dinner plate exploding into shards against the polished hardwood floor still resonates with painful clarity in my memory. That awful noise was immediately followed by words screamed by my daughter-in-law, Victoria. Words laced with absolute fury and contempt. "Old Shrew, get out of my life." These were delivered with a chilling venom directed solely at me while standing in front of a crowded room. Her friends, who had moments earlier been enjoying what seemed like a perfectly pleasant dinner party at my son's house, were now silent witnesses to this shocking display. The elegant atmosphere of the evening vanished in an instant, replaced by a thick, suffocating silence that pressed in on me from all sides. I could feel the collective weight of perhaps 20 pairs of eyes, maybe even more fixed, directly on me. The expressions varied among the onlookers. Some held a flicker of pity, quickly masked, while others were filled with uncomfortable awkwardness and palpable embarrassment. I was no longer seen as a respected guest, a loving mother-in-law. Instead, I had become the embarrassing spectacle, the unwelcome disruption, the cause of this terrible scene. My name is Ashley Thompson, and I am currently 65 years old. For the entirety of my adult life, my focus, my dedication, and my greatest efforts have been channeled into caring for and supporting my family. I consistently strived to embody the role of a devoted mother, and later when my son married a supportive and understanding mother-in-law. More recently, my greatest joy has been in being a loving and indulgent grandmother to my precious grandchildren. But that utterly humiliating night, Victoria's sudden and vicious outburst, left no room for doubt. It seemed painfully clear that none of my efforts, none of my good intentions, none of the love I offered seemed to matter to her in the slightest. "Mom, please!" I remember hearing my son Robert murmur softly from somewhere nearby, his voice barely a whisper. It was laced with a desperate pleading tone, a plea for me, his own mother, not to somehow escalate the already awful scene. Yet even in that moment, in that terrible public display, he did not turn to his wife. He didn't say a single word of correction regarding Victoria's appalling, disrespectful behavior. He did not stand up for me. He did not defend his own mother. I stood there rooted to the spot, feeling utterly frozen by the shock and the humiliation. The delicious food that had moments before been resting on my plate was now splattered unceremoniously across the front of my light-colored slacks, a visible stain mirroring the emotional stain on my heart. My hands were visibly trembling, and I wasn't entirely sure if the shaking was from the sheer shock of the attack, the surge of anger building within me, or the profound humiliation washing over me. Victoria stood opposite me, glaring her face, usually so carefully composed and perfectly finished with flawless makeup, was now twisted into a contorted expression of pure disgust and contempt aimed directly at me. This public attack, as awful as it was, wasn't the absolute first time she had shown me glimpses of her true feelings about me, but it was undeniably the most overt, the most brutal, and the most utterly humiliating incident we had ever experienced between us. "I really think it's best if you leave now, Ashley," she suddenly said, her voice undergoing a chilling, rapid shift to a sickly sweet tone that was dripping with a fake, insincere concern that made my skin crawl. "You're clearly upset, and we certainly wouldn't want you to have one of your episodes in front of everyone." Episodes. The word hung in the suddenly quiet air between us, a cruel and deeply unfair accusation designed to undermine and dismiss me. I don't have episodes. I have never had them. But Victoria, with calculated precision, and over the course of several years, had subtly and strategically constructed a false and damaging narrative about me, carefully presenting this version of events to Robert and their wider social circle. She had painted a picture of me as unstable, overly dramatic, difficult to deal with, and excessively intrusive in their lives and their privacy. And my son, Robert, the boy I had lovingly raised alone after his father. James died suddenly from a heart attack when Robert was just 10 years old. My son tragically seemed to have bought into her version of events. As I numbly mechanically gathered my handbag and my cardigan, preparing myself to leave, I caught a heartbreaking glimpse of my two beloved grandchildren. 7-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Lucas were peeking cautiously down from the top of the staircase, landing their little faces wide with visible confusion and understandable alarm. They were watching their grandmother being effectively driven out of their home, treated as if I were nothing more than unwanted rubbish to be discarded. What were they learning in that moment? What kind of lesson were they absorbing about respect for their elders, about the unbreakable bonds of family, about the fundamental way human beings should treat one another, especially those they claim to love? The drive back to my own house that night was a blur of hot, silent tears and a relentless replay of painful memories in my mind. My thoughts spiraled, replaying moments from the past 5 years, starting from the very first time Robert had excitedly brought Victoria home to meet me. Back then, she had seemed so genuinely charming, so eager to please. She had laughed genuinely at my stories, effusively praised my home and my cooking, and seemed genuinely interested in my life and experiences. The subtle shift in her attitude, the slow erosion of that initial warmth had been gradual, almost imperceptible at first. It began with a casually cancelled lunch invitation here, a subtly barbed or critical comment, masked as humor there. Then came the increasingly restrictive and arbitrary limitations placed on when and how often I was allowed to see my beloved grandchildren. There was always a seemingly reasonable-sounding excuse, provided they were too busy with school or various activities the kids desperately needed family time, just with their parents, meaning explicitly without the in-laws present. The excuses piled up, each one driving a further wedge between me and the people I cherished most. I finally pulled into the familiar, comforting driveway of the modest house where I had lived for 4 decades. This was the home where I had single-handedly raised Robert, after James's death, working tirelessly, often juggling 2 jobs simultaneously, just to ensure he had everything he needed to thrive and every opportunity he deserved to succeed in life. Now he lived in a large, comfortable house in the suburbs, a house provided by my efforts, with a wife who clearly seemed to despise me for reasons I found increasingly difficult to fully understand. Once inside the quiet solitude of my home, I sank onto my worn, familiar couch, still dressed in the clothes stained with the remnants of the ruined dinner, and finally allowed the dam of pent-up tears to break completely. I wept uncontrollably, not just for the deep, public humiliation I had suffered, but for my son's passive indifference in that moment, and most painfully for the ever-widening, aching distance that had grown between me and my precious grandchildren. My phone buzzed on the coffee table nearby, startling me out of my grief. I picked it up, my fingers feeling clumsy and numb. It was a text message from Robert. It read, "Mom, I'm really sorry about tonight. Victoria's just incredibly stressed with work right now. Please, just give her some space. Okay, space." That single word felt like the cruelest possible joke imaginable. Space was all I felt I had been giving them for years. So much space that I felt as though I was slowly, but surely, becoming a complete stranger to my own son and the children I adored. And yet, apparently, even that vast amount of space was still not enough for Victoria. Dragging myself reluctantly into the bathroom, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror hanging above the sink. I barely recognized the person staring back at me, slumped shoulders carrying the weight of the world, eyes puffy and red-rimmed from crying so intensely, a face etched deeply with exhaustion, and a profound, soul-deep sadness. When had I allowed myself to become this defeated version of myself? When had I even subconsciously started to believe that I somehow deserved this kind of cruel treatment, this systematic exclusion from my own family? That night's sleep offered little to no solace. I tossed and turned restlessly in my bed, my dreams filled with the terrifying, cacophonous sound of shattering porcelain and the angry, accusing voices shouting at me. In the fantastical, courageous world of my dreams, I found my voice. I stood tall, I stood firm, and I confronted Victoria, telling her exactly what I thought of her appalling behavior and her cruel words. In my dreams, I also reminded Robert of every single sacrifice I had ever made for him, every challenge I had overcome, every obstacle I had faced alone to provide him with a good, stable life and the opportunities he deserved. But the harsh reality of that night was far less courageous. In reality, I had simply gathered myself with what little dignity I had left, walked away silently, with my head bowed low, feeling utterly defeated, heartbroken, and completely alone. Morning eventually arrived, dragging itself into existence, but it brought absolutely no relief from the heavy, suffocating weight of my despair and humiliation. I knew deep down that I desperately needed to talk to someone about what had happened. I called my best friend Martha. Martha was a wise, sensible, and incredibly pragmatic woman who had patiently and repeatedly tried to gently open my eyes to Victoria's increasingly manipulative and controlling behavior for years. Ashley listened to me very carefully. Martha said firmly the moment I finished recounting the previous night's disaster, the shame evident in my voice. Enough is absolutely, unequivocally enough. You have allowed that woman to walk all over you, to push you around, and to treat you with utter contempt for far too long. When, Ashley, just when are you finally going to find the strength to stand up for yourself and demand the basic respect you deserve? But what can I actually do, Martha? I asked, my voice thick with despair and a sense of utter hopelessness. If I try to confront her directly, head on, she'll just twist everything around. She'll use it as another excuse, another justification, to keep me even further away from the children. I can't lose them, Martha. I just can't. So, Martha's voice remained gentle, but it was unwavering in its resolve. Your plan, then, is simply to keep taking her abuse, to continue allowing her to humiliate you publicly, and control your access to your own family, to the people you love most. Is that truly your plan for the rest of your life, Ashley? I had no plan at all. I felt completely trapped, caught in an impossible, agonizing dilemma, with no apparent way out. I could attempt to fight back, to actively push against Victoria's relentless cruelty and manipulation, but the terrifying risk was losing the fragile, tenuous connection I still desperately held on to with my son and my precious grandchildren. Or I could continue to quietly endure Victoria's persistent cruelty, her calculated slights, and the painful isolation she imposed upon me. What I didn't know as I sat there speaking to Martha, that morning feeling utterly lost and defeated, was that everything was about to change. Drastically, fundamentally. Monday was just around the corner, approaching rapidly, and with it, I would deliver a letter to Victoria. A letter that would shock her to her very core, and finally, irrevocably allow me to begin reclaiming the dignity and self-worth that she had so systematically stripped away from me, piece by painful piece, over the agonizing years of her presence in our lives. But before I could possibly do any of that, before I could even begin to write such a letter, I needed to find my courage again. And sitting alone at my kitchen table, sipping lukewarm tea from a familiar mug with a chipped rim, I had absolutely no idea, not the slightest inkling, that the courage I so desperately needed would appear in the most unexpected place imaginable, or that the most powerful weapon I could wield against Victoria's tyranny had been in my possession all along, waiting patiently in the shadows, just waiting to be discovered. The weekend stretched out before me like an endless empty road, a desolate landscape filled with a thick haze of self-pity and deep, lingering regret. By Sunday afternoon, the quiet solitude of my small house and the relentless, agonizing cycle of my sad, defeated thoughts had become utterly unbearable. I desperately needed a distraction, something, anything, to occupy my mind and my hands, to break the suffocating grip of my despair. I decided on a whim to tackle the cluttered attic, a dusty, forgotten space that I had been consciously putting off cleaning out for years. Perhaps the physical labor involved the simple, repetitive act of sorting through old belongings and lifting boxes might offer a different kind of pain to focus on a temporary, physical escape from the persistent, aching, empty void in my chest. The attic air was stiflingly hot and heavy, thick with the distinct smell of old paper-forgotten belongings and stored memories all packed away haphazardly in countless cardboard boxes accumulated over decades. I started almost instinctively with the boxes clearly labeled Robert's Childhood. Inside, I unearthed dusty baseball trophies, faded report cards, school projects lovingly preserved, and thick, worn photo albums meticulously documenting every single milestone of his young life. Birthdays, school plays, family holidays, scouting trips. Had Victoria ever seen these tangible pieces of his history, these physical embodiments of his past? Did she know how I had cheered myself hoarse at every single one of his seemingly endless baseball games he played as a boy? How I had stayed up late into the night, bleary-eyed helping him with complicated science fair projects that seemed designed to test my patience, or how I had worked extra shifts at my jobs exhausting myself, just to save enough money to cover the costs of his college applications and eventual tuition fees. Hours slipped away unnoticed as I sifted through the contents of those boxes. Each item unearthed a poignant, bittersweet reminder of a time when my life had been so intimately and intrinsically intertwined with my son's life. My back ached from the awkward bending and lifting, and a fine layer of dust coated my clothes and skin. But the physical discomfort was almost a welcome sensation, a solid, real feeling that grounded me in the present and momentarily distracted me from the emotional pain. It was then tucked away almost out of sight behind an old forgotten dresser that had been stored in the furthest, darkest corner of the attic that I found it. A large, thick manila envelope. I didn't recognize it immediately. Its presence in the attic was a surprise. The envelope itself was brittle and significantly yellowed with age, the flap sealed tightly with tape that had clearly been there for many, many years undisturbed. With careful, trembling fingers, I managed to gently pry it open. Inside were documents, stacks of papers I hadn't thought about, perhaps hadn't even looked at or touched in years. My heart gave a sudden sharp jolt as I slowly realized what they were, the legal deed to Robert's house. My late husband James had originally purchased that specific property many years ago, shortly before his sudden and unexpected death from a heart attack. He had bought it specifically as an investment property, with ambitious plans to renovate it extensively and turn it into a rental property for extra income, a way to build financial security for our future. But he never had the chance to see that plan through to completion. After he died so unexpectedly, amidst my overwhelming grief and disorientation, I simply couldn't bring myself to sell the house. It felt like one of the last tangible connections I had to his vision for our future together. Instead, I had continued year after year to quietly pay the property taxes and cover the minimal maintenance required to keep the empty house from falling into disrepair, letting it sit empty and unused for years. Then, when Robert and Victoria made the decision to get married, they were struggling financially like many young couples starting out trying desperately to save enough money to afford a down payment on their very first home. I remembered the moment so clearly as if it were yesterday. It happened right here at this very kitchen table where I now sat with the deed in my hands. I had slid a single key, the key to that empty house, across the worn surface towards my son. "It's yours, Robert." I had told him, explaining that his father had bought the property years ago with the intention of it being an investment for his future. "Consider it an early inheritance from your dad and my wedding present to you both." Robert had been absolutely stunned, visibly overwhelmed with gratitude and disbelief. Victoria, when he told her the amazing news, had been utterly ecstatic, overjoyed at the incredible prospect of unexpectedly having their own home given to them. What I hadn't mentioned at that time, what honestly hadn't seemed important or relevant amidst the excitement of the wedding and my own complicated emotional state, was that I had never actually completed the legal transfer of the property into Robert's name. I had given them the key. I had given them my heartfelt permission to live in the house and treat it completely as their own, to make it their home. But the legal deed, the official binding document proving ownership, still unequivocally listed me, Ashley Thompson, as the sole legal owner. I stared at the stack of paperwork spread out before me on the kitchen table, my heart hammering furiously against my ribs with a confusing mixture of disbelief and something akin to a dawning, powerful realization. According to these official, undisputed documents, I still legally owned the very house where Robert and Victoria had been living for years, the very house from which Victoria had so cruelly and publicly thrown me out just 2 days prior. I sank onto a dusty old trunk I had pulled down from the attic, my mind reeling, racing through the potentially immense implications of this discovery. Did they know, had Robert or Victoria ever bothered in all these years to check the official property records held at the county office? Given Victoria's reaction to me on Friday night, her casual dismissal of my presence, and her blatant assertion of control over her space, I strongly doubted she had any idea whatsoever that she was actually living rent-free and without legal title in a house that legally belonged to me. As I continued digging carefully through the thick envelope, I found other related documents supporting this fact. Old insurance papers dating back years, detailed property tax records stretching back over a decade, and the original purchase agreement signed by James. Every single document, without exception, confirmed the incredible, unbelievable truth: the house was still legally, undeniably mine. I carefully carried the precious, dusty documents downstairs, laying them out meticulously across my kitchen table to examine them more thoroughly in the brighter, natural light filtering through the window. There had to be a mistake, I thought, my mind struggling to process the information. Surely I wouldn't have forgotten something so incredibly significant, something as crucially important as legally transferring ownership of a property worth so much. But there was no mistake to be found. The papers were clear, precise, and entirely undisputed. I had given Robert the key. I had verbally told him the house was his to live in, a generous gift. But in the thick, disorienting fog of grief and distraction that had followed James's sudden death all those years ago, I had simply never completed the necessary legal steps, the official paperwork required to transfer the deed. I had just handed over the keys, preoccupied with my sorrow, and allowed them to move in, naively trusting that we would eventually sort out the official paperwork properly when things settled down and life became less chaotic. But we never had. My phone rang suddenly, the jarring sound startling me out of my deep, consuming thoughts about the property deed. It was Sandra, a kind neighbor who lived just a few houses down the street from Robert and Victoria. "Ashley, I hope I'm not disturbing you at a bad time," she said hesitantly, her voice cautious and uncertain. "Not at all." "Sandra," I replied, trying to keep my voice light despite the turmoil inside me. "Is everything okay? Is something wrong?" She paused for a moment, a lengthy silence on the other end of the line, before finally answering. I actually wanted to call and check on you after what happened at the dinner party on Friday night," she said gently. "Word gets around this neighborhood quickly, you know how it is." I closed my eyes for a brief second, a fresh wave of hot, painful humiliation washing over me all over again, as sharp and intense as it had been on Friday. "I'm fine, Sandra, really?" I lied softly, forcing the words out. "Thank you so much for calling, and for asking. It means a lot." "There's something else, Ashley," she said, her voice dropping now to a lower, more confidential tone. "I honestly am not one to spread gossip, you know that about me, Ashley. But I thought you should know this. I've seen Victoria with someone several times now." My grip on the phone tightened instinctively, my knuckles turning white. What exactly do you mean, Sandra?" I managed to ask, my voice suddenly tight. "A man," she clarified, her voice gentle but firm. "Not Robert. They meet quite often, I've noticed, at the little cafe just down the street, on Maple Street. They seem very close, Ashley. Just yesterday afternoon, I saw them again in his car parked not too far from the park. They were kissing, Ashley. A long, passionate kiss. The room seemed to tilt slightly around me, the air suddenly growing thin and difficult to breathe. Victoria was cheating on my son. This was the same woman who had relentlessly, deliberately pushed me out of their lives, who had so successfully manipulated and convinced Robert that I was the real problem, the intrusive, difficult, overly attached mother. My mind reeled. Have you told Robert about this, Sandra?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper filled with shock. "No, I haven't. Ashley," Sandra replied, her voice full of empathy. I thought you should know first. I honestly wasn't even sure if I should say anything at all. It felt like such a delicate and potentially painful matter. After Sandra and I hung up the phone, I remained seated at my kitchen table, motionless, feeling numb. I was surrounded by the undeniable physical proof of my unexpected property ownership, and this explosive, devastating new information about Victoria's infidelity. Victoria was betraying my son in the cruelest possible way. She was living comfortably, seemingly without a care in the world, in a house that legally and unequivocally belonged to me. And she had publicly humiliated me in front of her friends just 2 days ago. The scattered pieces of the puzzle, the disparate events of the past few years were suddenly starting to fit together in my mind, forming a chilling and coherent pattern. Victoria's increasing hostility towards me, her seemingly irrational and intense determination to completely cut me out of their lives, to limit my access to my son and grandchildren. What if it wasn't just the typical, albeit intensified, mother-in-law, daughter-in-law tension I had always assumed it was? What if she was deliberately and strategically isolating Robert from his closest emotional support system, from his own mother, perhaps to make her own secretive actions, her affair, easier to hide, less likely to be discovered? I knew with a growing certainty that I needed to verify Sandra's story, to somehow confirm her observations independently before jumping to any drastic, potentially damaging conclusions. But combined with the stacks of property documents spread out before me, On the table documents that proved my legal claim to the house I now possessed, information that could fundamentally and completely change the power dynamic between Victoria and me. For the very first time since that disastrous dinner party, since walking away with my head bowed, I felt a small flicker of something other than crushing despair or deep humiliation. It wasn't quite hope yet. Not quite a feeling of vindication, but a growing solid certainty. A quiet resolve that the universe, in a strange and unexpected twist of fate, had just handed me the unexpected means to finally reclaim the lost dignity and self-respect she had stolen from me, and perhaps even more importantly, to protect my son from a painful truth he clearly didn't suspect was happening right under his nose. Monday was fast approaching, rushing towards me, and with it came a monumental decision, a difficult choice I never in a million years would have thought I would have to make. Should I confront Victoria directly with everything I now knew about the house, about the affair? Should I tell Robert myself about his wife's devastating betrayal? Or should I simply quietly and firmly assert my clear legal rights to the house they occupied? As the sun slowly began to set outside my kitchen window, casting long weary shadows across the room, one thing became absolutely, undeniably clear to me. I was done being the passive victim in Victoria's cruel narrative. It was finally time for me to take back control, to write my own ending to this painful story. That night's sleep proved to be an elusive, impossible luxury. I tossed and turned restlessly in bed, my mind racing uncontrollably, cycling through all the possible scenarios and potential far-reaching consequences of the difficult choice that lay before me. By morning, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion had settled over me, heavy and suffocating, but strangely it was accompanied by a newfound quiet sense of clarity and unwavering resolve. I knew with a certainty that surprised me what I had to do. I called Martha the very moment it felt like a reasonably decent hour to disturb her. "Martha," I said when she answered the phone, my voice surprisingly steady, stronger than I had expected it to be. "I need your advice. Can you possibly come over to my place?" About an hour later, Martha was sitting across from me at my kitchen table, her expression calm and supportive. Between us lay the stack of old yellowed property documents and a steaming pot of strong, freshly brewed coffee. Martha listened intently without interrupting her gaze, focused, as I painstakingly explained everything that had happened over the weekend, finding the unexpected house deed, and the shocking realization that I was still the sole legal owner of the property, receiving Sandra's startling and devastating revelation about Victoria's ongoing affair, and my growing uneasy suspicion that Victoria's deliberate and systematic efforts to isolate me from Robert and the children were calculated, strategic, and intimately connected to her secret double life. When I finally finished recounting the long, complicated, and emotionally exhausting tale, Martha reached across the table and squeezed my hand warmly, her touch conveying a silent understanding. "Ashley," she said softly, her voice gentle but firm. "I've been waiting 5 years for this moment, waiting for you, for Robert to finally see what that woman truly is. I should have listened to you sooner. Martha." I admitted the heavy weight of regret settling in my voice. "You tried to warn me. The question isn't about the past. Now, Ashley," Martha said, her gaze direct and focused, tapping the property deed gently with a finger. "The question, the only question that matters now, is what are you going to do now? You have options, Ashley. Real power, tangible leverage right here at your fingertips." Did I? The very idea felt completely foreign, almost alien, even after years of consistently yielding to Victoria's demands, of consciously stepping back from my son's life. in a desperate attempt to maintain a fragile artificial peace, of deliberately making myself feel smaller and less important to accommodate her obvious hostility and controlling nature. I could tell Robert about the affair, I said quietly, stating one of the daunting options swirling in my mind, the words feeling heavy and uncertain. Martha frowned slightly, her expression thoughtful. And what if he doesn't believe you? Ashley Victoria has had years, absolute years, to skillfully poison him against you, to carefully paint you as jealous, unstable, and difficult. He might easily think you're just making it all up out of bitterness or spite, desperately trying to break up his marriage. She was absolutely right, of course. Victoria had expertly, calculatedly positioned me as the stereotypical, interfering, clingy mother who simply couldn't gracefully accept that her son was now a married man with his own independent life and family. Any accusation, any warning coming from me would inevitably be filtered through that distorted negative lens she had so meticulously created. Or, Martha continued, her voice gaining a sharp strategic edge, her eyes holding a knowing glint. You could use the house, Ashley. Legally, you could file the paperwork, assert your ownership, and formally evict them. I recoiled instinctively at the very thought, the idea filling me with horror. Oh, Martha, no. I would never ever do that to Robert. And more importantly, I would never ever do that to my grandchildren. Never. Of course you wouldn't, Ashley, she agreed immediately, her tone reassuring. I know that about you, but Victoria doesn't know that for sure, does she? She doesn't know how far you'd go or what you're truly capable of when pushed. I stared at my oldest and dearest friend, suddenly seeing the sharp, strategic mind and the quiet strength that had allowed her to build a successful business empire before her well-deserved retirement. You think I should threaten her? I asked the word, feeling strange, uncomfortable, and slightly distasteful on my tongue. Was this truly something I was considering? I think, Martha clarified, a determined glint in her eyes now, you should let her know unequivocally, with absolute certainty, that you know about everything. The affair, the fact that you own the house, the whole truth. Let her fully realize, let it sink in completely, that the power dynamic she so carefully established has completely, irrevocably shifted, and that she is no longer entirely in control of the situation. A mischievous, almost wicked smile touched her lips fleetingly. Watch her squirm for a change, Ashley. Just watch. The idea was undeniably tempting, intoxicatingly tempting, in a way that actually frightened me a little. Was I truly capable of considering such a calculated, potentially ruthless act of retaliation? But wasn't that precisely what Victoria had been doing to me, subtly, consistently, and cruelly for years? I don't want revenge, Martha, I said finally, the conviction settling firmly in my heart, clarifying my true motivation. That's not what this is truly about for me. I just want to protect my son and my grandchildren from being hurt any further, from being caught up in her deceit, and maybe just to get back a little bit of what she has taken from me over the years, my dignity, my peace of mind, my rightful place in their lives. Martha nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her expression. Then you need concrete evidence of the affair, Ashley, she stated, practically shifting back to the logistical aspects. Something undeniable, something that Robert cannot easily dismiss or rationalize away if it comes to that difficult conversation. And then what happens, Martha? I asked, the anxiety beginning to creep back in, tightening its grip on my chest. Do I just shatter my son's heart completely? Do I intentionally destroy his family? Victoria is already doing that. Ashley, Martha said bluntly, her words hitting me like a sudden cold splash of water, jolting me back to reality. You wouldn't be destroying his family by revealing the truth. You'd just be opening his eyes, finally, to the devastating truth of what's been happening right under his nose, the destruction she is already causing. After Martha left, the quiet house felt incredibly heavy, with the immense weight of the decision that now rested solely on my shoulders. I sat alone at the kitchen table for a long time, the property documents still spread out before me, like a map of my unexpected power, or contemplating my options and steeling myself. The mere thought of directly confronting Victoria made my stomach clench painfully, with intense anxiety. She was younger than me, outwardly seemed so much more confident and assertive, always quicker with her sharp-cutting remarks and dismissive attitude. But then I had a sudden important realization. She had also never ever seen me truly fight back, seen me push against her control, seen me assert myself. Driven by a new quiet resolve that felt foreign, yet empowering, I spent the remainder of that Sunday afternoon driving towards the area near the cafe on Maple Street, the very place where Sandra had reportedly seen Victoria with her suspected lover. As if fate itself were guiding me, my luck unexpectedly held. There they were, sitting together at one of the small outdoor tables, their hands openly intertwined across the tabletop for anyone to see. I parked my car a safe distance away, positioned carefully to be hidden from their view, and used my phone to discreetly take pictures, capturing the undeniable scene. From my vantage point, Victoria looked animated, genuinely happy, her face alight with an ease and comfort I had rarely, if ever, witnessed when she was in Robert's presence. The man with her was handsome in a polished, seemingly well-off way. He sported an expensive haircut, and his clothes were clearly designer. They appeared completely comfortable together, familiar like a couple who had been seeing each other for some time, their interactions suggesting this was clearly not a casual, brand-new development. I followed them at a cautious distance when they eventually got up and left the cafe. They walked together towards a sleek, expensive-looking car, parked on a quiet side street or away from the main thoroughfare. Before getting into the vehicle, Victoria paused and glanced around quickly, a furtive, cautious movement, betraying a need for secrecy, and then leaned in to share a long, passionate kiss with the man. My phone's camera captured it all, every heartbreaking, damning detail of their embrace. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, a sick twist in my stomach, but my determination solidified, hardened by the undeniable proof they had just obtained. They drove away and I followed for only a short distance, before realizing I didn't need to go any further, didn't need any more proof. I had seen enough, captured enough. By the time evening fell, completely casting long, deep shadows across the world, I knew with absolute, unshakable certainty what I had to do. Not for revenge, not for some petty, vindictive satisfaction, but because my son, my kind, trusting son, deserved to know the truth about the woman he had married, the woman he shared his life and children with. And because after years of shrinking myself, of making myself smaller and quieter, I deserved to reclaim my self-respect, my lost dignity, and my rightful place in my family. That night, rather than tossing and turning in anxious despair, sat down calmly at my old wooden desk in the study. I picked up a pen, a simple act that felt significant, and began to write. The words, much to my surprise, flowed more easily and steadily than I could ever have anticipated, appearing on the page, clear, factual, and firm. Victoria. I am writing this letter to you today because there are 3 crucial things I want you to know. Fundamental truths that I believe will irrevocably change the way you see things, and consequently, the way things are and will be between us from this moment forward. First and unequivocally, I want you to understand beyond any shadow of a doubt that the house you are currently living in, the very property from which you chose, with such cruelty, to throw me out on Friday night, legally and officially belongs to me. I never completed the necessary legal transfer of the deed into Robert's name, despite my intentions at the time. Enclosed with this letter for your review, you will find clear, undisputed copies of the relevant property documents, including the deed itself that unequivocally prove my sole legal ownership of the property. Second, I want you to know, without any attempt at denial or prevarication, that I am fully and completely aware of your ongoing affair. I know about the man you meet secretly at the cafe on Maple Street. I know about your trips together specifically, mentioning the Parkview Hotel, which I have reason to believe is one of your meeting places. I have obtained indisputable photographic evidence of your illicit relationship, and copies of these photographs are also enclosed with this letter for your review. Third, and perhaps most importantly for you to understand, I want you to grasp the profound depth of my unwavering love for my son Robert and for my beloved grandchildren Emma and Lucas. They are everything to me, the absolute most important people in my entire world. For years I have consciously stepped back. I have remained silent in the face of your deliberate cruelty and disrespect, and I have endured your calculated attempts to isolate me from my own family, because I was utterly terrified of losing them completely if I pushed back too hard. That period of quiet suffering, Victoria, ends now. I want to be completely clear about my intentions. I do not genuinely want to hurt Robert. I do not want to cause pain or devastating disruption to my precious grandchildren, whose well-being is paramount. However, I will absolutely not, under any circumstances, allow you to continue actively destroying our family from within, to continue your deceit, your disrespect, and your cruelty, while simultaneously living comfortably under my roof, in my house. You are now faced with a very clear, unavoidable choice, Victoria. You can choose to end your affair immediately and permanently, and begin treating me and everyone in this family with the basic level of respect and decency that any human being, any family member, truly deserves. Or should you choose otherwise, I will take the necessary steps to inform Robert of everything I know about your infidelity, and concurrently initiate formal legal eviction proceedings to have you removed from the property that I legally own. I am not asking for us to suddenly become best friends, to forge some impossible close bond. That is clearly beyond possibility given our difficult history and the circumstances that have unfolded. I am simply requiring honesty, fundamental decency, and mutual respect. Respect for myself and respect for the sake of my son Robert, who deserves so much better than the betrayal and deceit you are inflicting upon him. You have until the end of the day on Friday to make your decision and clearly indicate your intentions regarding this matter. Sincerely, Ashley. I read the letter over carefully, several times, my fingers tracing the edges of the crisp pages, the ink somehow seeming powerful and permanent. A strange, unexpected sense of calm had settled over me, replacing the anxiety and despair. The words weren't filled with vindictive anger or overwhelming, uncontrolled emotion. They were simply clear, factual, firm, and undeniable. I gathered the necessary copies of the property documents, the deed, the tax records, and printed out several of the clearest, most damning photos I had taken at the cafe and by the car. I placed everything neatly inside a fresh envelope and sealed it decisively. Tomorrow was Monday. Tomorrow I would go to Robert and Victoria's house, and I would personally hand Victoria this letter, this package filled with hard truth and undeniable evidence, a package that would make her literally fall out of her chair, just as I had envisioned in my moment of humiliation. tomorrow everything would change thing. For the very first time in what felt like years in a long, long time, I slept soundly, deeply peacefully, undisturbed by the usual anxieties and fears of disapproval, rejection, or further humiliation. Whatever was going to happen next, whatever the consequences, I knew I would face it standing tall with my head held high, no longer defeated. Monday morning dawned bright and clear, a stark, almost mocking contrast to the turbulent emotional storm that was brewing and churning inside me. I dressed with deliberate care, choosing a simple, comfortable blue dress that Martha always insisted brought out the color of my eyes and gave me a sense of calm confidence. I paired it with comfortable but elegant flat shoes and applied just a touch of makeup. Not for Victoria's benefit, certainly not for her approval, but entirely for my own. Today I needed every single ounce of self-possession, inner strength, and quiet confidence I could possibly muster. The sealed envelope containing the key to unlocking my future and potentially changing theirs lay on my kitchen counter waiting to be delivered. Inside rested the undeniable truths that had the power to shatter the carefully constructed facade Victoria had built around her life, the irrefutable proof of her long-standing affair, and the dry legal documents clearly showing that I, not she or Robert, was the sole legal owner of the very house she had seemingly transformed into her personal fortress, her bastion of control against me and my presence. I checked the time on my kitchen clock, noting the minutes ticking by. Robert would definitely be at work by now. He always left the house promptly at 7:30 a.m. like clockwork. The children, my precious Emma and Lucas, would be safely at school, immersed in their studies and activities. Victoria typically spent her Monday mornings at home. I knew her routine well, catching up on various household tasks or running errands before often meeting friends for lunch or appointments later in the day. It was the perfect planned opportunity to deliver the letter directly to her, ensuring Robert or the children wouldn't be present to witness the confrontation. As I drove the familiar route towards their house, towards the address that was legally mine, my resolve briefly wavered a momentary flicker of doubt. Was I truly prepared to potentially upend everyone's lives so dramatically to cause such upheaval? What if this entire situation, this confrontation, somehow backfired and made things exponentially worse? What if Robert, my son, caught unexpectedly in the painful crossfire of truth, somehow blamed me, the messenger bearing difficult and devastating truths, rather than placing the responsibility for her actions squarely on Victoria's shoulders for her deliberate betrayal? No, I said aloud, gripping the steering wheel tighter, my voice firm and steady, despite my internal trembling and uncertainty. I cannot, and I will not, keep living like this any longer. Feeling this way, invisible and disrespected in my own family. The house, my house legally speaking, although it still felt incredibly strange and almost unbelievable to think that, came into view around the gentle bend in the road. The front lawn was meticulously manicured, perfectly green and trimmed, and the garden beds were overflowing with the vibrant seasonal flowers that Victoria carefully selected, planted and maintained each year, creating a picture of domestic perfection. Even from the outside, the house projected an image of the perfect, idyllic suburban home, seemingly belonging to a perfect, happy family. But I knew better now. I parked my car quietly at the curb, took a deep, fortifying breath, the kind you take before diving into cold water, and walked slowly, deliberately up the stone path leading to the front door. The envelope felt heavy in my hands, weighted not just with paper and ink, but with immense consequences, with the potential to change absolutely everything in an instant. I reached out my hand steady and pressed the doorbell, then waited, my heart pounding erratically and loudly against my ribs like a trapped bird. After a tense moment that felt like an eternity, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching the door from inside. The door swung open, and there stood Victoria, looking as perfectly put together as ever, even in the casual setting of her own home, dressed impeccably in designer jeans and a crisp white blouse. Her expression, initially neutral and perhaps slightly expectant, shifted instantly to one of cold, unmistakable annoyance and irritation the moment she saw it was me standing on her porch. "Ashley," she said flatly, her voice devoid of any warmth, any welcome, completely cold. "Robert's not home right now, as I'm sure you know." "I know," I replied, my voice surprisingly steady, stronger, and more resolute than I had expected it to be. "I actually came here today specifically to see you, Victoria." She raised one perfectly shaped eyebrow, a clear gesture of impatience and dismissal, making no move to step aside or invite me into the house. "I thought I made it quite clear on Friday night that we needed some space from you, Ashley." "You made a lot of things clear on Friday night, Victoria," I said, meeting her gaze directly, refusing to look away. "May I please come in for just a few minutes? What I need to say, what I need to give you won't take long." Victoria hesitated for a moment. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she clearly weighed her options, debating whether to grant me access, then finally stepped back, grudgingly leaving just enough space for me to enter the foyer. "All right, fine," she stated, her voice sharp and clipped, granting me permission with obvious reluctance. "5 minutes only, Ashley. I have a very busy day planned, and I don't have time for this." I walked past her and followed her into the spacious living room, the very same room where she had subjected me to such a public, brutal humiliation just 3 short days before. The physical evidence of that awful incident was, of course, gone. There were no shattered porcelain fragments, no lingering food stains on the polished floor. But the emotional debris, the lingering tension, the palpable pain from that night remained thick and heavy in the air between us, an invisible barrier. "Well," Victoria prompted, impatiently crossing her arms defensively across her chest and tapping her foot rapidly and nervously on the floor, clearly wanting me to get to the point. "What is so incredibly important, Ashley, that you had to come all the way here today and demand my time?" Without uttering another word, I simply held out the sealed envelope towards her, my hand steady. "This is for you, Victoria," I said, my voice calm and even. She looked at the envelope suspiciously. Her eyes narrowed, her expression wary. "What is it?" she demanded. "It's something I think you need to see, Victoria." I responded, simply keeping my answer deliberately brief and understated. With obvious reluctance and a loud sigh of exaggerated annoyance, Victoria took the envelope from my hand and tore it open quickly, impatiently. Her eyes scanned the first page of my letter, and I saw them widen slightly, just perceptibly, in surprise, as she began to read. Then, her fingers tightening their grip around the paper, she quickly flipped through the letter to the section containing the property documents. By the time her eyes fell upon the photographs enclosed at the end, the color visibly drained from her face, leaving her complexion pale ashen and almost ghostly white. She looked up at me, then back down at the damning photos, then down at the deed, her gaze darting back and forth, frantically, between the evidence. Her legs seemed to buckle beneath her as she suddenly sank onto the nearest armchair, clutching the papers tightly in her trembling hands, her facade of control crumbling rapidly. This is absolutely absurd," she stammered, her voice shaky and thin, attempting to regain her composure, but the sheer panic flashing visibly in her eyes betrayed her weak attempt at bluster and denial. These photos they don't actually show anything incriminating at all. And this paperwork must be completely outdated. It has to be wrong somehow. Other photos show exactly what they appear to show, Victoria. I said calmly, my voice remaining steady and unwavering, a stark contrast to her rising panic. They show you with another man engaging in behavior that clearly indicates a relationship far beyond friendship. And the property records, I can assure you, are absolutely current and legally binding. I took the liberty of checking with the county office just yesterday to confirm everything and ensure there were no outstanding changes or transfers. Victoria's carefully constructed composure cracked further, splintering under the immense pressure of the undeniable truth laid bare before her. "You had no right to spy on me like that, Ashley!" she exclaimed, her voice rising in pitch tinged with outrage. "And you," I countered, meeting her gaze directly, holding her eyes, "had no right whatsoever to treat me the way you have treated me for years, Victoria. You had no right to systematically isolate my son from his mother, to arbitrarily limit my time and access to my own grandchildren based on your whims and insecurities, and you certainly had no right to publicly humiliate me and throw me out of my own house, the house that is legally mine. My house." Her voice became shrill, filled with disbelief and righteous outrage. "This is our house, Robert's and mine. We've lived here for years. Robert and you have been living here comfortably, Victoria, because I allowed it." I interrupted quietly but firmly, cutting through her rising hysteria. "I gave him the key many years ago as a wedding present, yes, as a symbol of support and love. But I never completed the legal transfer of the actual ownership of the property into his name. It was an oversight on my part at the time, born out of grief and distraction, following James's death, but as it turns out now, it was a very fortunate oversight. Indeed, wouldn't you say?" Victoria abruptly stood up from the armchair, her face flushing a deep, angry red, with uncontrolled rage and frustration. "This is nothing but blackmail, Ashley!" she accused, her voice spitting the word out like poison. "No," I said evenly, maintaining my calm, controlled demeanor, refusing to be drawn into her emotional outburst. "This is not blackmail, Victoria. This is a clear boundary being set firmly and unequivocally. This is me finally standing up for myself, for my family, and for my dignity, after years of enduring your deliberate cruelty, your disrespect, and your manipulation. You wouldn't dare tell Robert, would you?" she hissed, leaning towards me menacingly, her eyes narrowed into angry, calculating slits. "It would completely destroy him, ruin his life as he knows it. Is that what you want, Ashley, to intentionally hurt your precious son?" I met her intense, challenging gaze, steadily refusing to flinch or back down. "I don't want to hurt anyone, Victoria. That is precisely why I am here right now, giving you this choice, this opportunity. End the affair immediately. Start treating me and everyone else in this family with basic respect and common decency. Or if you choose not to, you will face the very real, unavoidable consequences of your actions, which include me telling Robert everything I know about your infidelity and concurrently initiating formal legal proceedings for your eviction from this property." Victoria's eyes narrowed, further filled with a dangerous, cold intensity. "You think you've won here, don't you, Ashley?" She sneered, a cruel, mocking smile touching her lips. "You think you can just waltz in here with your pathetic threats and your so-called evidence and suddenly have some kind of power over me? This is not about winning or losing, Victoria." I stated clearly, trying consciously to keep my voice level and devoid of emotion. "This is fundamentally about truth, and it is about my family. Yes, my family, which includes my son Robert and my grandchildren, Emma and Lucas, and my rightful deserved place within that family structure. She suddenly threw the papers she was still clutching tightly in her trembling hands onto the coffee table between us, scattering them. Her hands were visibly shaking with barely contained rage and frustration. "Get out of my house!" she screamed, her voice cracking with the force of her emotion. "Get out now!" "My house." I gently corrected my voice, quiet but firm, turning slowly towards the front door, the strange, empowering calm still supporting me, holding me steady. "You have until Friday to decide what happens next, Victoria. Choose wisely." As I walked out the door and onto the porch, closing the door quietly behind me, I felt a profound sense of lightness, a release of tension I hadn't experienced in years, despite the intense emotional tension of the confrontation I had just navigated. I hadn't raised my voice, I hadn't lost control of my emotions, or allowed her anger to dictate the terms of our interaction. I had simply stated my truth, presented my undeniable evidence, and calmly set my terms. From the car as I started the engine, I glanced back at the house, the picture of suburban perfection that held such complex, painful history. Victoria was standing framed in the front window, watching me, her expression unreadable from this distance, likely a mixture of shock, fear, and fury. I had absolutely no idea what she would choose to do next, whether she would end the affair, genuinely agree to my terms, or attempt to call my bluff believing I wouldn't dare follow through. But for the very first time in our difficult, agonizing 5-year relationship, the outcome, the immediate future, was not entirely within her sole control. As I pulled away slowly from the curb and drove down the street, leaving the house and the confrontation behind, I realized with a sudden powerful jolt that I was no longer afraid of her. Whatever the next few days or weeks held, whatever challenges or difficult conversations were yet to come, I had reclaimed something essential, something invaluable, that she had tried to steal my voice, my power, and my sense of self. I had fully expected that I would have until Friday, the firm deadline I had explicitly set in my letter to Victoria, before hearing anything further, either from her or from Robert. I was wrong. By Tuesday evening, barely 24 hours after delivering the letter, my phone began ringing incessantly and non-stop. First, it was Victoria calling repeatedly, leaving a string of angry rambling and increasingly desperate voicemails, her voice filled with fury and disbelief. Then Robert called, his voice sounding deeply confused, worried, and clearly stressed. Then Victoria called again, her messages growing even more venomous and threatening in tone. I let each and every call go directly to voicemail, needing the time and the necessary space to steady my nerves, to collect my thoughts, and to prepare myself mentally and emotionally for the inevitable difficult conversations that I knew were coming. Conversations that would be far more consequential than anything that had happened before. Victoria's messages were a barrage of accusations, denials, and thinly veiled threats. "You've made a terrible mistake, Ashley. A huge mistake. You have absolutely no idea what you've done or what I am capable of if you continue this." Robert's messages were a stark, heartbreaking contrast, filled only with bewildered concern and confusion. "Mom, what on earth is going on? Victoria is incredibly upset, completely distraught. She says you came to the house yesterday and threatened to evict us. Please call me back as soon as you possibly can, Mom." After listening carefully to Robert's worried and distressed voice on the voicemail, hearing the genuine confusion and pain in his tone, I took a deep, steadying breath, bracing myself, and finally called my son back. "Robert," I said when he answered, trying, consciously, to keep my voice calm, measured and reassuring despite the storm of emotions inside me. "I think we really truly need to talk about this, Robert, but not over the phone. It's too important too, complicated. Can you possibly meet me somewhere in person? Somewhere private where we can talk openly? Mom." He responded immediately, his voice sounding harried, stressed, and completely overwhelmed. "Whatever is happening, whatever this is between you and Victoria, can't you just apologize and try to smooth things over? Please, she's honestly really upset about this." Something inside me, a small but firm knot of resolve and self-respect that had solidified over the past few days, snapped quietly but decisively. "No, Robert, not this time," I said, my voice firm, unwavering, and holding a strength that surprised even myself. "I cannot, and I will not, apologize for standing up for myself and telling the truth. This is different, Robert. This is important, truly important, far more important than just smoothing things over or trying to keep a false peace. Can you meet me at Riverside Park, the one near the river? Maybe in about an hour." There was a long, tense pause on the other end of the line as he processed my words, processing the unexpected firmness in my tone. "All right, Mom." He finally agreed, sounding weary and resigned. "I'll meet you there. But Mom, please." He added a clear plea, now evident in his voice. "Let's just resolve this peacefully, okay? Without any more drama." The park was quiet and peaceful in the early evening light, the setting sun casting a warm, golden glow over the landscape. It was a welcome contrast to the intense emotional turmoil I felt churning within me. There were just a few joggers finishing their runs along the paved paths, and a couple of people walking their dogs, enjoying the fading sunlight and the tranquility. I found an empty bench overlooking the river, its surface catching the last rays of light, and sat down watching the water flow steadily and calmly past an ancient constant presence. There was a strange, unexpected sense of comfort in that constancy, in the river's quiet, uninterrupted flow. The river had been here long before my problems with Victoria began, and would continue to flow long after they were resolved one way or another. Robert arrived looking visibly stressed, his face drawn, his tie loosened, haphazardly, his hair slightly rumpled as if he had been running his hands through it, repeatedly in frustration or distress. A nervous habit I remembered vividly from his childhood, a clear indicator of his anxiety. "Mom," he said, sitting down beside me on the bench, his shoulders slumped with the weight he was carrying. "What is all this about? Victoria says you came to the house yesterday, and that you're threatening to evict us. Is that true?" I turned to face him fully, my heart aching with a deep maternal pain at the lines of worry etched into his face, and the sheer confusion and hurt visible in his eyes. "Robert," I began, softly choosing my words carefully, deliberately wanting him to understand. "There are some things you need to know, sweetheart, things that I probably should have told you much sooner. Years ago, perhaps." Slowly, deliberately, I explained everything to him about the house, about the unexpected discovery of the old deed in the attic, and how through simple oversight, and not by any deliberate intention or malice on my part, the property had remained legally in my name all these years despite my initial gift. Robert listened intently, his expression shifting from confusion to shock as the implications sank in, but there was no anger directed towards me, only surprise and a growing understanding. "Mom, why didn't you ever say anything about this before?" He asked, his voice quiet, filled with disbelief. "Why wouldn't you tell me I didn't actually own the house?" "Honestly, Robert," I admitted truthfully, feeling a pang of regret for my past oversight. "After I gave you the key, all those years ago, after James died, in my mind, it was your house. It felt like a gift from his legacy to you. I genuinely forgot about the legal technicality of the deed transfer in the midst of my grief and trying to put my life back together. I only rediscovered the truth, the fact that the deed was still in my name, when I was cleaning out the attic this past weekend trying to distract myself. Robert nodded slowly, processing the complex information, his brow furrowed in thought. "Okay," he said, finally speaking. "Well, we can fix that easily. I'll call our lawyer first thing tomorrow morning and have the deed transferred properly, legally into my name right away. That seems straightforward enough." I took another deep, bracing breath, preparing myself for the more difficult, the more painful truth that I now had to share with him, the truth that would undeniably shatter his world. "There's something else, Robert," I said, my voice a little quieter, now filled with the weight of the impending revelation. His face fell slightly, his expression tightening as he anticipated more bad news, more difficult information. "Mom, please," he said, sounding weary again, resigned to hearing something unpleasant. "If this is about Victoria's behavior at the dinner party on Friday I told you, she's just incredibly stressed with work right now, under a lot of pressure. Victoria is having an affair, Robert," I stated plainly, directly cutting through his attempt to make excuses for her feeling the immense difficulty of speaking the words aloud to my son. Robert froze instantly on the bench beside me, his body becoming rigid, his face draining completely of color, becoming as pale as the river stones scattered along the bank. "What?" He whispered the single word barely audible, a gasp of disbelief. I reached out and gently took his hand, my heart aching with his pain, feeling his shock and devastation as if it were my own. "I am so sorry, sweetheart," I said softly, my voice filled with genuine sorrow for the pain I was causing him. "I would never ever tell you something like this. Something so hurtful if I wasn't absolutely certain, beyond any doubt, that it was true. No," he said, pulling his hand away, abruptly shaking his head vigorously, in denial, refusing to accept the reality of my words. "You're wrong, Mom. You must be mistaken. Victoria wouldn't do that to us. She loves me. She loves our family. She would never jeopardize that." "Robert," I said gently but firmly, retrieving my phone from my pocket, knowing that only undeniable proof would convince him. "I have proof, sweetheart." I unlocked the phone and carefully showed him the photos I had taken the day before, clear images of Victoria with her lover at the cafe, their passionate kiss by the car, the images of them entering the hotel together. With each photograph, he looked at Robert's expression crumbled further, the color leaving his face entirely, his initial denial, fading rapidly into shock, then pain, then utter devastation. "No!" he whispered again, more to himself now than to me, staring blankly at the photos on the screen. "No, this can't be happening. This isn't real." "I am so sorry, Robert," I repeated, feeling his anguish mirroring my own pain. "I never ever wanted to hurt you like this, to be the one to deliver this news, but you deserve to know the truth about what's been happening in your life, about the person you married." He stood up abruptly from the bench, unable to sit still, beginning to pace back and forth restlessly in front of me, running his hands through his hair repeatedly, in distress, a familiar sign of his deep anxiety. How long have you known about this, Mom?" he asked, his voice ragged and strained, filled with raw emotion. "Just since Sunday." I told him honestly, explaining the sequence of events. "A neighbor, Sandra, who lives near you, saw them together several times, and finally felt that she needed to tell me what she had witnessed. Robert continued pacing his breathing shallow and fast, his mind clearly racing. "And the eviction threat? Was that real, Mom?" he asked, stopping suddenly and looking at me, his eyes pleading for an answer. "Or was that just something you said to scare her to get a reaction? I would never ever in a million years put you and the children out on the street, Robert," I said firmly, looking him directly in the eye, wanting him to understand that my true intentions were always focused on protecting him and the children. Never. My home will always be your home, always a safe place for you. But Victoria didn't know that for sure, did she? She had no way of knowing how far I would go. I needed her to understand unequivocally that things had reached a breaking point, that I would no longer allow myself to be treated like I was dirt, like I was disposable, like I didn't matter in my own family. I needed her to know I had leverage. He was quiet for a long moment, stopping his restless pacing and staring out at the slow-moving river, lost deep in thought, processing the immensity of the revelations. "All these years," he said finally, his voice heavy with a dawning painful realization, understanding starting to connect the dots. "Victoria told me. She told me that you were deliberately trying to come between us, Robert, that you were clingy and possessive, that your feelings were always hurt, because you just couldn't accept that I was a married man now and had my own independent life away from you, that you were somehow trying to sabotage our marriage." My throat tightened with a rush of emotion, the old words and accusations stinging, bringing back years of hurt. "And you believed her, Robert?" I asked softly, the pain evident in my voice. "She was my wife, Mom," he said simply, his voice quiet, stating the fact that had defined his reality for so long, then immediately corrected himself with a sigh that was filled with regret and sadness. "She is my wife. I tried so incredibly hard, Robert," I said, feeling the old familiar pain resurface, but now tinged with a sense of vindication. "I stepped back just like you," and she asked. "I made myself small, inconspicuous. I accepted the little scraps of time she allowed me to spend with you and the children, always trying desperately to keep the peace, always hoping against hope that things would eventually get better between us, that she would change." Robert turned back towards me fully, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with unshed tears, reflecting the depth of his pain and regret. "I should have seen it, Mom," he said, his voice thick with remorse, his gaze fixed on me. "I should have listened to you. I should have stood up for you, for us, for our family bond. We both made mistakes, sweetheart," I said, gently reaching for his hand again across the bench, and this time, blessedly, he didn't pull away. He held on tightly. "But it's not too late for us to try and fix things now, for all of us to try and move forward. What am I going to do, Mom?" he asked, his voice cracking with emotion, suddenly sounding like the lost, vulnerable little boy who had faced the devastation of his father's sudden death all those years ago. "The children. What about Emma and Lucas in all of this?" "You're going to take some time, Robert," I said softly, squeezing his hand reassuringly. "Time to think clearly, away from the immediate shock and the emotional chaos. You're going to decide on your own what you believe is truly best for you and for Emma and Lucas, for your family's future, whatever that might look like. And whatever you decide, Robert, whatever path you choose to take, I will be here always, and I will support you unconditionally every single step of the way." "She's going to say you're lying about all of it, Mom," he said, anticipating Victoria's predictable reaction, her likely defense mechanism. "She's going to say you've always been jealous of her, That this is all just your way of getting back at her for Friday night, for everything. I nodded, acknowledging the likelihood of her denial and counter-accusations. Probably. That's precisely why I made sure to make copies of everything, Robert, the photos, the property documents. She can deny it all she wants, she can scream and lie, but the truth, the hard, undeniable evidence, is the truth. It speaks for itself. Robert slowly sank back onto the bench beside me. His shoulders slumped, the heavy weight of this devastating revelation settling upon him, changing his world in an instant. I need to confront her, Mom, he said finally, his voice quiet but resolute, a newfound determination replacing the initial shock. Do you want me to come with you, Robert? I offered immediately, instinctively, ready to stand by his side to offer whatever support he needed in that difficult moment. He considered this for a moment, looking towards the river again, his gaze distant, then slowly shook his head. No, Mom. Thank you, but no. This has to be between me and Victoria. Alone. His voice faltered slightly, filled with uncertainty about the immediate future. But afterward I might need a place to stay for a while. For me and the kids, if that's okay? You know you are always, absolutely, always welcome at my house, Robert. I said, my heart simultaneously breaking for his pain and swelling with a fragile, tentative hope. A hope that my son, the real Robert, the loving boy I had raised, might finally be finding his way back to me, back to our bond. As dusk began to settle over the park, painting the sky in soft, hazy hues of orange and purple, Robert and I sat together in comfortable, companionable silence on the bench, watching the steady, unwavering flow of the river. The difficult, painful confrontation with Victoria still loomed ahead for him, a daunting hurdle he had to face alone. But something fundamental had already shifted between us, irrevocably changed. For the first time in years, in a very long time, my son and I were truly on the same side, facing a difficult, painful truth together, instead of being divided by Victoria's manipulations, her secrets, and her fabricated narratives. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever the immediate future held for our family, we would face it together as a family. The real family, the one that had existed strong, resilient, and full of love, long before Victoria had ever entered our lives and tried to break us apart. 6 months. It can be enough time to fundamentally change everything. On a warm, bright Saturday morning, bathed in sunlight, I stood in my kitchen, the comforting aroma of cooking breakfast, filling the air a scent of normalcy and peace. I was carefully preparing pancakes, focusing on making them in fun shapes, like dinosaurs, a cherished weekend tradition that had blessedly been reinstated in our lives recently. Upstairs, I could clearly hear the cheerful patter of small feet and excited whispers as Emma and Lucas woke up and started their day, their innocent sounds filling the house with life. "Grammy, is breakfast ready yet?" Emma called down the stairs, her voice clear, bright, and full of happy anticipation, carrying easily through the house. My house, which now felt more like a real home, truly lived in, filled with more love, laughter, and the joyful noise of children than it had in decades. "Almost ready, sweetheart." I called back, smiling genuinely, as I carefully flipped a perfect triceratops-shaped pancake onto a plate waiting on the counter. "Tell your daddy to bring you both down when you're ready to eat." So much, truly and profoundly so much, had fundamentally changed in our lives since that fateful Monday morning, just 6 months prior, when I had walked up the path to their house and handed Victoria that heavy, consequential letter. The confrontation between her and Robert, which had happened later that very evening, had been, as my son later described it to me, explosive, deeply painful, and filled with raw emotion. Victoria had initially denied everything, of course, desperately trying to discredit me, claiming I was lying, that I had manufactured the evidence that I was making it all up out of jealousy and spite. Then, according to Robert's weary recounting, she had quickly pivoted to placing blame. It was Robert's fault for being emotionally distant in their marriage. It was my fault for somehow turning him against her with my accusations. It was even bizarrely society's fault for not understanding her complex needs that led to the affair. But when Robert armed with the undeniable evidence of her infidelity, that I had provided the photos and the hotel information stood firm, refused to accept her lies or her attempts to deflect blame, and calmly laid out the truth, her carefully constructed defenses had finally, spectacularly crumbled. The woman who had always seemed so invincible, so cruelly confident, so utterly in control of every situation and every person around her, had revealed herself to be nothing more than a fragile house of cards built precariously on a foundation of deceit, insecurity, and manipulation. Robert and the children had moved in with me the very next day, bringing only what they could quickly pack into a few suitcases. Their lives abruptly, dramatically changed. Victoria had been absolutely apoplectic, threatening every kind of legal action imaginable. Lawsuits, bitter custody battles, even vaguely hinting at physical violence against me. But when Robert's lawyer, not mine as I had firmly insisted from the start that the legal aspects of the divorce remained primarily between them as a couple ending their marriage, had presented the indisputable property documents proving my legal ownership of the house along with the overwhelming evidence of her infidelity, Victoria's legal position, her demands, and any leverage she thought she had had significantly and irreversibly weakened. The divorce proceedings themselves had been difficult, drawn out, and emotionally draining for everyone involved, especially for the children who were caught in the middle of their parents' painful separation. Emma, at 7 years old, was old enough to grasp in her own way that her mother had done something seriously wrong, something that had deeply hurt her father and shattered their family unit as they knew it. Lucas, at 5, was simply too young to fully comprehend why his world had suddenly fractured overnight, why he was living in Grammy's house instead of his own home. I had done my absolute best, pouring all my energy and love into providing a safe, stable, comforting, and loving environment for them during those turbulent months, trying to shield them as much as possible from the adult pain. My small house, the one I had lived in alone for so long, after James's death, became a refuge, a sanctuary not just for Robert and the children, but unexpectedly for me as well. After years of feeling pushed to the margins of my own family's life, feeling like an inconvenience or an outsider looking in, I was suddenly central again, needed, deeply involved, and profoundly valued. Robert appeared in the kitchen doorway now, a child clinging happily to each of his hands, their little faces bright with anticipation and hungry excitement. "Good morning, Mom," he said, his voice warm, relaxed, and genuinely happy, a tone I hadn't heard consistently in years. "Something smells absolutely amazing in here this morning. Dinosaur pancakes!" Lucas exclaimed loudly, his eyes wide with excitement, spotting the fun shapes on the counter where I had placed them. I smiled, warmth spreading through me, filling the empty spaces Victoria had created, and carefully flipped the last perfect triceratops onto the waiting plate. "Who wants the first one?" I asked, turning towards them, ready to serve the eager customers. Mimi, both children shouted in unison, their voices overlapping in their eagerness, scrambling eagerly onto the chairs at the table where I had placed booster seats for them. As I served them breakfast, carefully cutting the pancakes into smaller, more manageable pieces for their little mouths, I couldn't help but marvel at how natural this felt, How right it seemed to be having my family, my real family, gathered around my kitchen table starting the day together, building new routines, creating new happy traditions together, healing the old wounds. It wasn't the future I had ever specifically envisioned for myself. Certainly not one that had arrived without significant pain, heartache, and difficult confrontation. But it was real, it was here, and it felt incredibly precious and deeply comforting. Robert caught my eye over the children's heads and smiled a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached all the way to his eyes. Unlike the strained, often sad or worried expressions I had grown so accustomed to seeing on his face during his marriage to Victoria. "Thanks for everything, Mom," he said softly, his voice filled with sincerity and gratitude. Honestly, I don't know how we would have gotten through all of this, through the divorce, the mess without you here. You saved us. That's what family does, sweetheart, I said, simply, my heart overflowing with love and quiet satisfaction. We show up for each other, especially when things are tough, when life gets difficult. We support each other. After breakfast, while Robert helped the children get dressed and ready for their morning activities, a trip to the library and the park, I checked my email, sipping on my coffee, enjoying the quiet moment. Amidst the usual stream of unimportant messages, newsletters, promotion spam, there was one email that made my heart skip a beat. But this time, the flutter was with a different kind of emotion, a sense of completion and peace. It was a confirmation email. The property transfer was complete. I had officially signed over the house. My house, legally speaking, the house that had given me such unexpected leverage, to Robert. It had been entirely my decision, one I had made thoughtfully after months of careful consideration, discussion with Martha, and eventually practical conversations with Robert's lawyer regarding the logistics of the transfer and the final sale. The house, for all of us, held too many painful memories, now irrevocably tainted by Victoria's infidelity, her cruelty, and the intense conflict that had unfolded within its walls. More importantly, it had become profoundly clear to me that Robert desperately needed a fresh start, a clean break from the past, a home that was truly and entirely his own, free from Victoria's negative influence, free from the complicated history it now had with me and her. The sale of the house had officially closed yesterday, finalized the day before. Robert didn't know about it yet. I planned to tell him later today to show him the final papers, the legal confirmation that made him the sole legal owner of the property. It was time for him to rebuild his life and his children's lives on his own terms, in a space that belonged completely and unequivocally to him and the children, a true, fresh start. The doorbell rang suddenly, the unexpected sound interrupting my thoughts and pulling me back to the present moment. Robert appeared in the hallway from upstairs, a look of confusion on his face. "Mom, are we expecting someone today?" he asked, puzzled. I shook my head, equally surprised. "Not that I know of, sweetheart. It must be unexpected, I'll get it." Opening the front door, I found Victoria standing on my porch. She looked noticeably different from the polished, perfectly put-together, confident woman who had once thrown my plate to the floor in a fit of uncontrolled rage. Her hair was simply pulled back in a casual ponytail. Her face was bare of any makeup, revealing a vulnerability I had never seen, and her usual expensive designer clothes had been replaced by simple jeans and a plain, unassuming sweater. "Ashley," she said softly, her voice lacking its usual sharp, confident edge, surprisingly hesitant. "May I please come in for just a minute?" I hesitated, my protective instincts immediately flaring up instinctively, thinking of Robert and the children upstairs wanting to shield them. Victoria. I began carefully choosing my words deliberately. I really don't think that's a good idea right now. It might be best. Please, she interrupted quickly, her voice tinged with a quiet desperation, a genuine plea I hadn't heard from her before. Just for a minute, I really need to say something to you, Ashley. Something important. Behind me from the hallway, I heard Robert's sharp intake of breath as he recognized his ex-wife's voice. "Mom, it's okay," Robert said from behind me, his voice surprisingly calm. "Let her in. Let's hear what she has to say." Victoria stepped hesitantly into the hallway, her eyes darting nervously towards Robert, then back to me, her discomfort evident. "I won't stay long, I promise," she said, her voice slightly shaky. She took a deep, visible breath, as if bracing herself for a difficult task. "I came here today to apologize to you, Ashley." Of all the things I might have ever expected from Victoria, a genuine, unprompted apology had absolutely never ever been on my list of possibilities. These past few months have been incredibly difficult. She continued, her voice slightly shaky with emotion. "I've had a lot of time, too much time perhaps, to really think about everything that happened. The divorce, losing custody of the children." Her voice faltered slightly, and her eyes glistened with unshed tears, genuine emotion visible. "I've been seeing a therapist, working really hard to understand why I did the things I did. Why I behaved the way I did, why I was so angry and cruel." Robert stood silently in the hallway, his arms crossed loosely across his chest, his expression guarded but listening intently to every word his ex-wife was saying. And I was wrong," Victoria said simply, looking directly at me now, her voice stronger, clearer, filled with a quiet conviction. "I was deeply insecure, incredibly jealous of your close relationship with your mother, Robert. I convinced myself, twisted things in my mind, that she was somehow trying to control our lives, our marriage, to break us apart, when, in reality, I was the one who was trying to control everything and everyone around me, driven by my own issues." She turned her gaze towards me directly again, her eyes searching mine. "Ashley, I treated you terribly, inexcusably. The awful, cruel things I said to you, the deliberate and calculated ways I isolated you from Robert and the children. There is absolutely no excuse for any of it. I am truly, truly sorry for all the pain and humiliation I caused you." I searched her face intently, looking for any flicker of manipulation, any hidden agenda behind the words, or in her eyes or demeanor. But I found only what appeared to be genuine remorse, profound sadness, and a quiet vulnerability. This wasn't the confident, cutting, controlling Victoria I had known and endured for years. Or perhaps I thought this was a part of Victoria, a broken, vulnerable, regretful side that I had never ever been allowed to see, before a side revealed only by the pain of her consequences. "Thank you for saying that, Victoria," I said carefully, choosing my words deliberately, allowing myself to accept her apology, to let go of some of the hurt. "It means a lot to me, more than you know, to hear you say that, to hear you acknowledge the pain." "The children are upstairs, Victoria," Robert said from the hallway, his voice softer now, the guard in his tone lessened, replaced by a quiet consideration. "They're almost ready to go to the park. Would you like to see them briefly before we leave?" Victoria's eyes filled with fresh tears at the offer spilling onto her cheeks, undeniable proof of her emotion. "Oh, Robert," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion filled with gratitude and regret. I would very much like to see them. Thank you." As she slowly, hesitantly climbed the stairs to greet her children, a privilege she had lost for a time, Robert turned to me, his expression still thoughtful, processing the unexpected turn of events. Do you think she's sincere, Mom?" he asked quietly, seeking my perspective, my wisdom. I considered the question for a moment, watching Victoria disappear around the corner, at the top of the stairs, her figure small and less formidable than before. "Yes, Robert," I said, nodding slowly, feeling a sense of quiet certainty. "Yes, I do. I think she is. People can change, sweetheart. Sometimes they just need a very painful, very necessary wake-up call. A harsh reality check to see things clearly, to confront their own flaws and actions." Later that day, after Victoria had left, and the children were sound asleep in their beds upstairs, exhausted but happy from their morning of playing at the park, I sat down with Robert in the living room. I showed him the property transfer documents, the official legal proof that the house, the place that had been the source of so much conflict and leverage, was now legally and solely his property. "Mom, I can't possibly accept this," he said, looking at the papers with disbelief, overwhelmed by the generosity. "It's your house. You can, and you will, Robert," I said firmly, gently, placing the documents into his hands, watching him finally take legal ownership of the place that had been his home for so long. "It's time for you and the children to have your own home again. A fresh start, a clean break, in a place that is entirely yours, without any complicated history, without any attachments to the past conflicts or the pain." Robert pulled me into a tight embrace, hugging me fiercely, his voice thick with emotion, his body shaking slightly with relief and gratitude. "Mom, I don't deserve you," he whispered into my shoulder, the words muffled but heartfelt. "You deserve everything good and happy in this life, Robert," I said, holding him close, my arms wrapped around my grown son. "You always have ever since you were a little boy, and you deserve a real home, a fresh start." That evening, as I sat on my porch, swing the familiar rhythm of its motion comforting me, watching the sun dip slowly below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery, breathtaking colors, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 6 months, the unexpected turns our lives had taken, the deep pain and public humiliation of that dinner party, the initial shock of discovering the truth about Victoria's betrayal, and my unexpected ownership of the house, the terrifying but necessary courage it had taken to finally write that letter and confront her. All of it, every difficult step, every tear shed, every moment of doubt, had ultimately surprisingly led to this moment of quiet peace and tentative hope. I had never genuinely wanted revenge on Victoria. My true desire had been much simpler, much more fundamental. I had only ever wanted what everyone deserves: respect, acceptance, unconditional love, and a secure, valued place within my own family, within the lives of my son and grandchildren. In finally finding the strength and the courage to stand up for myself, to reclaim my voice, I had not only reclaimed my lost dignity and self-worth, but I had also inadvertently perhaps helped my son to finally see the truth he had been willfully blind to or manipulated into not seeing for far too long. The future was still uncertain, of course. Robert and the children would eventually move out of my small house and back into their own home, starting their new life there. Victoria would, despite everything, remain a part of our lives through her role as the children's mother. The healing process for all of us would undoubtedly take more time, more effort, and require forgiveness and understanding. But as I watched the last golden light fade from the sky, giving way to the soft glow of twilight, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, a quiet peace. The plate Victoria had thrown to the floor that night had indeed shattered beyond repair, a painful symbol of a broken relationship. But my family, my real family, Robert, Emma, Lucas, and me, had not shattered. We had, through pain, through truth, and through courage, begun the difficult but necessary process of piecing ourselves back together, stronger in the broken places, ready finally to begin again, together building a new future rooted in honesty and love. Now, as you've listened to my story, shared my journey through pain and revelation, I'm curious about your thoughts and your perspective. What would you have done if you found yourself in my exact situation, facing similar betrayal and challenges? Have you ever experienced something similar, a deep conflict, or an unexpected truth within your own family dynamics? Please take a moment to share your thoughts, your feelings, and your experiences in the comments section below. I read every single one, and your insights are valuable. And while you're here, I'm linking 2 other channel favorites on the final screen, stories that are equally compelling, filled with unexpected twists, and will definitely surprise you with their outcomes. Thank you for listening.